So just for the people in the room, we are going to record the meeting of today. So no one can see this recording. We are going to record only the part of the speech, and then we're going to shut it down. So no one can see you actually, because the screen only shows this part of the.
Which is that's my best. My best group.
So I put this one, right? And then, like this. Wait, remind me. Fancy.
Did I also?
You want to sit?
I will be there.
Wahrscheinlich, weil dann bleibt es kühl, aber ich finde es nicht so, als würde das sich auch
Ja,
wenn man sich auf einen Punkt stellt, dann bleibt es kalt, aber sonst hört man das Geräusch nicht auf dem Recording.
Yeah. Yeah, to put it maybe
Yeah.
one.
So that's what I think.
Okay.
Doesn't blow so much.
No, it's okay. It's your network.
Yeah.
This is weird. Okay, so you can hear me, right?
So maybe we don't have this. People register for the day, but then I can't get them.
Okay, so welcome everyone today to the last actually appointment of the Wednesday seminar. Today we are joined with the Vaso. Please join me here. It's a little bit different format today because we are going to record the speech, and the speech will be then put in the website of the VAS, and later we will tell you what the VAS is, the Vienna Animal Studies group, right? It's different also for the format because usually we have a dinner afterwards, and today instead we have a little bit of a buffet with snacks. So after the speech, we can join all together after the discussion. We can join all together in a less formal way of discussing what it will be presented today. As usual, instead, we will have more or less 45 to 1 hour presentation by Neha Vora, and then it will be followed by questions, hopefully, from the audience and also from the people online. We have several options for the people online. You can raise your hand, or you can also write down in the chat your questions, and I will also forward to our speaker guest. And this will be introduced by a representative of the VAS, so Vienna Animal Studies Group.
All right. Okay. Hello, everybody. Hi. My name is Claudia. I'm here with you today. How many of you have heard of Vienna Animal Studies before? Great. Most of members. We're a relatively new group. We launched just over a year and a half ago. We've got a lot of philosophers and ethicists in our group, which is great, but we're trying to connect with other scholars. The animal tone in animal studies and in scholarship in general is part of history, it's part of sociology, it's part of geography, and we want to learn from each other and from others. So we're an inter-university, interdisciplinary group that create opportunities for lectures and learning from each other. It gives me great pleasure to be here with you all today. Thank you so much for graciously hosting us and for letting us piggyback on your already very successful lecture series. Neha and I have connected online over several things. I'm guessing you've read Neha's profile before getting here. Yes, she's very impressive, does incredible work with cats in the UAE. And I'm going to keep my thing short because I'm not interesting, whereas Neha is. So please give us.
Agreed.
Okay, fine. I'm very interesting, and you're very lucky to hear me speak. But for the interest of wanting to hear what's happening here, I'm going to keep my comments brief. I will be back with you during the Q&A. But for now, can you give Neha a round of applause? Thank you, Neha.
Hey, thank you, Claudia and Rika, for inviting me, and thank you all for being here. So I just want to thank the Department of Social and Cultural Anthropology here at the University of Vienna, and also the Vienna Animal Studies Group, for inviting me to speak with you. So today what I'm going to be talking about is some of the research from my current book project on stray cat care, urban belonging, and immigrant homemaking in the United Arab Emirates. So in this broader project, I asked how Gulf studies might look if we understood them not only as spaces of human migration, Gulf cities might look if we understood them not only as spaces of human migration, but as multi-species ecologies shaped by cats, plants, birds, insects, dogs, gardens, feeding stations, security guards, housemaids, rescuers, and the many informal practices through which temporary residents make life livable. For those of you familiar with my previous work, it might seem a little bit of a leap to move from studying immigration in the Gulf to studying cats, but in fact, these have always been intertwined topics, and cats have always been interlocutors of sorts in my travels and research in the region. It has just taken me a little while to come to this realization and to begin to think in less anthropocentric ways about what it means to study urban life in the Gulf. So one of the central arguments of this project is that the Gulf migrant city, or any city anywhere, has never been only human, and this is not terribly, insightful argument. But Gulf cities in particular, however, are usually theorized through human mobility, through labor migration, temporary residence, deportability, remittances, racialized citizenship, and the impossibility or fragility of permanent belonging. My own earlier work has participated in that conversation by asking how Indian diasporic communities make forms of home and citizenship in Dubai, despite formal exclusion from national belonging. But what I've come to see, both retrospectively and through this newer fieldwork, is that the migrant city is also made through non-human mobilities. Cats have traveled with humans across maritime and mercantile worlds. They have settled in port cities, markets, warehouses, labor camps, villas, campuses, and apartment blocks. They live alongside human immigrants, but not merely as metaphors for them. They have their own territories, socialities, reproductive lives, vulnerabilities, and claims to urban space. So rather than treating cats as a new object of study, I am asking what becomes visible when we understand Gulf urbanism itself as multi-species. What would it mean to think migration, transience, informality, and homemaking through the human and non-human lives that have always inhabited these cities together? I use ecology here not to mean a bounded natural system outside the city, but a set of relations among bodies, infrastructures, affects, climates, built environments, food systems, and practices of care. So in 2006, now 20 years ago, I lived in Dubai while conducting my dissertation research, which was the basis for my book, Impossible Citizens, in which I explored forms of belonging among the Indian diaspora in Dubai, specifically in the older neighborhoods of the city surrounding the Dubai Creek, which is a traditional mercantile center. This was at the beginning of Dubai's neoliberal development boom, and much of what is now iconic in the city, all the buildings that you know the city through, had not yet been built. The neighborhoods where I conducted my research, built around the trade of the Dubai Creek, contained primarily low-rise apartment buildings with window AC units, walkable city blocks, small eateries and shops, and were spaces where the sights, sounds, and smells evoked South Asia much more than the Middle East. My field site was also full of cats, and I got used to seeing and greeting regulars on my daily walks. Given the loneliness of those early months of fieldwork before I had made any human friends, the cat regulars on my circuit became friends I could count on and made transitioning to Dubai life easier. Often, these encounters would lead to conversations with security guards or shopkeepers who would tell me the names and biographies of their building cats. Through the cats, I learned about their immigration stories, their families, and their experiences of being South Asian living and working in Dubai. In the years since I completed Impossible Citizens, Dubai has changed drastically. Some of these changes are troubling. The gentrification of my original fieldwork neighborhoods like Karama and Bur Dubai, for example, means that fixed rent housing for lower middle class immigrants is no longer available, and people who had lived in old Dubai for decades are being priced out. On the other hand, city planning has included a metro and much more public space for residents to access. Working class immigrants from Asia and Africa who used to be relegated to old Dubai or to labor camps at the edges of the city now also live in apartments, often illegally subdivided, alongside wealthier Western residents of new Dubai in places like the Jumeirah beach residences or the marina, leading to more diverse neighborhoods. It is in this reordered Dubai, one that still maintains many of the stratifications and categories of being that define the Dubai that I experienced in the mid-2000s, that I started this more than human ethnography. I wanted to understand better the role of stray cat care in producing urban belonging and whether relationships with cats and other non-humans mitigated the loneliness and precarity that many immigrants, especially those there without human family members, experience. The start of this project also coincided with COVID-19, and from my vantage point in the United States at the time, I could see, mostly through the UAE online communities that I was part of, that precarity was increasing, especially for non-Western, middle, and working class immigrants. I could also see that animal abandonments were becoming even more common as people had to leave suddenly, move into shared bed space, or could no longer afford to take care of their pets. I became interested in exploring the impacts of these changes through a multi-species lens. In August 2023, I relocated to Sharjah, Dubai's neighboring emirate, to take up a faculty position at the American University of Sharjah, where I've been since. Since I moved to the UAE, I am constantly in my field site, and I am constantly discussing my project ideas with others. I am finally starting to have interlocutors in the true sense of the term. Many of the ideas expressed today have been developed in conjunction with a number of these people who hail from a range of backgrounds. I have also expanded my understanding of methods beyond traditional interviews to make my project more collaborative as well as more grounded in my urban circulations. So in order to understand people's relationship to cats, as well as how cats are part of their everyday practices of homemaking, I have been going on what I call cat walks with them in their neighborhoods. Sorry, folks, I really have no friends, and they only message me when I'm either teaching or giving a talk. So I've been going on what I call cat walks with these people in their neighborhoods. Some are feeders who spend hours a day taking care of cat colonies. Others organize with community members to set up feeding stations and manage the health of the cats in their developments. And still others are just interested in showing me the cats in their local parks or residential areas. Through these cat walks, I have seen how other non-humans, particularly plants and birds, are also central to people's homemaking practices. These catwalks get me and my interlocutors to contemplate together and even rethink our relationship to our neighborhoods and cities and to those who co-inhabit them. They are also a way to shift from observation-based ethnography to what Cecile Sachs-Olsen calls participatory action. In the spirit of this term, my collaborators and I make knowledge together, as well as work toward improving our shared multi-species urban space. These walks allow us to map alternate urban geographies that register both feline territories and human-non-human relations of care and precarity. I argue as well that for many of my interlocutors, walking is a form of politics. To walk in Gulf cities is to refuse disposability and invisibility, to resist the pace of enclosure and speed, and to insist that public space belongs to more than just some. To walk is to move slowly through cities designed for cars and consumption, and in so doing to open up alternate urban temporalities and relationalities. Okay, that's not working. Can I do this later? Okay, perfect, thanks. So how do we tend to envision the city, especially a city like Dubai, that is marked by spectacle? For the most part, we are programmed to think of Gulf cities in formal top-down ways through iconic buildings, maps, and large-scale infrastructures like you see here. The Museum of the Future and the Emirates Towers, and this is part of the Dubai International Financial Center, which I'll talk about later. This is also a capitalist way of thinking about the city, one that reduces us to productivity and extracted value. These ways of thinking about the city, along with the lack of public spaces and our inability to organize together, Abdul Malik Simone argues, quote, contribute to an intensifying individualizing of the practices of urban residency, end quote. But is this how people actually live their lives in the UAE? I would like to argue that Dubai and other Gulf cities are not formally planned as much as they are marked by informality, and that informality is the primary mode through which most people inhabit them. Here I take inspiration from Simone's concept of the surrounds, which exists not just at urban edges, but throughout urban space, and become central both to everyday inhabitation and forms of resistance to more carceral and capitalist urban orderings. He writes, cities are replete with clearly designated spaces: industrial, carceral, administrative, domestic, festive, logistical. But there is always something left over in their operations, something not completely captured by the terms of their respective functioning. So the surrounds is the relationship among spaces whose complexion exceeds their function while maintaining them, and whose functions are never clearly stabilized because they seem to absorb the multiplicity of characteristics that make up the place of the surrounds. In this relationship between what exceeds definition and coherence and what insufficiently consolidates clear definition is an interstice of momentary possibility, a possibility for propositions and the rehearsal of experimental ways of living that circumvent debilitating extraction, surveillance, and capture for the time being. The surrounds for Simone are a site of submergent infrastructures, of excess, of the not yet captured, of accompaniments to formality that unsettle formality. We could consider the urban edges as surrounds, but surrounds are not just subaltern or at the edges of town. They exist everywhere in the city and are utilized and produced by everyone. This image, for example, is from one of the most expensive residential neighborhoods in Dubai. So just as Simone challenges what is erased when we consider the urban through planning and formality, Rupali Gupta and Prasad Shetty argue that cities are not representable through our most common modes of knowing them, cartography and statistics. Cartography cannot handle indistinct places like this, like the surrounds. It produces a morality of fixity and clarity that cannot capture the messiness and dynamism of urban metabolism. Instead, they argue that the city is animated by, quote, small forces. These are the unpredictable madness of all of our energetic selves. They are interested in the ways that small forces inhabit space and how networks and friendships make up both institutions and cities in ways that urban planning, which relies on maps and numbers, cannot anticipate. Instead, they use storytelling and micronarratives, the tools of the ethnographer, to explore what kinds of inhabitations are afforded by various urban forms. The one-room tenement shawls in Mumbai, for example, produced as uninhabitable by census data, are in fact teeming with small forces whose relationships with each other have thickened over time, and who inhabit these spaces in ways that allowed them to provide mutual aid and survival strategies in the wake of COVID-19. New development that aims to relocate Indian slum dwellers to high-rise buildings breaks these relationships, and in turn, those urban forms are in fact less inhabitable. Or we shall see how they become inhabited over time. What urban studies scholars rarely consider, however, is that cities are not just made by humans, but by a multitude of non-humans as well. Can we think of a more unpredictable and energetic small force than a cat? Cats are ubiquitous in Gulf cities and can be found all over Dubai and the UAE. From the older neighborhoods I mentioned earlier to planned communities, labor camps, industrial areas, abandoned warehouses, college campuses, corniches and fish markets, and just about anywhere else you can think of. And apparently turkeys also, these are from Sharjah near a fruit and vegetable market. Cats move in and out of formal categorization. They can be domestic, abandoned house pets, strays living in colonies, or feral loners. Or they can move between these modes several times in their lifetime. They are perhaps the quintessential Indian Ocean migrants, moving around the world on boats and settling in port cities. In many ways, they share precarities and marginalizations with human migrants. They are also unwelcome, just as racialized and classed bachelors are unwelcome in more sanitized spaces like upscale malls and gated communities. And their life circumstances are directly related to ours. They rely on human inhabitation for their food sources, yet they also have their own agencies and ways of experiencing the city. To call cats Indian Ocean subjects is not simply to say that they moved across the sea with humans, though of course many of them did, while others are also descendants of cats that originate in the region. It is to situate them within a much longer history of port cities, trade routes, ships, food storage, markets, domestic interiors, and imperial and post-colonial forms of mobility. Cats are commenced commensal animals, their lives have long been entangled with human settlement, grain storage, kitchens, refuse, fish markets, and the built environments of trade. In that sense, the cats of Dubai, Sharjah, Abu Dhabi, and Ras Al Khaimah are not incidental to the Gulf City. They are part of the material and ecological archive of the very forms of mobility that made these cities. This matters because public debates about street cats often collapse quickly into the language of native versus invasive, local versus foreign, natural versus out of place. But in a region shaped so profoundly by migration, maritime trade, imperial infrastructures, oil capitalism, and temporary residence, these categories do not hold very well, and in fact show us that they probably don't hold very well in other locations as well. This does not mean that cats have no ecological impacts or that multi-species ethics can avoid questions of harm. Rather, it means that harm cannot be understood through origin alone. These categories can even reproduce the same fantasies of purity and rightful belonging that structure exclusionary human politics. So rather than asking whether cats are native or invasive, I want to ask a different set of questions. What histories have made cats at home in Gulf cities? What kinds of urban relations do they sustain? What forms of care, conflict, abandonment, reproduction, and regulation gather around them? And what obligations emerge once we recognize that they are not outside the city, but among its ordinary residents? Yamini Narayan argues that animals showcase most clearly the informality of the city, as they do not conform to zones, borders, or the way that infrastructure is meant to be used. Animals are ultimately informal because their species boundaries do not follow our rules, neither do their temporalities. Narayan offers the example of leopards in Bombay, the city with the highest number of urban leopards, though you will never see them personally. When captured on CCTV, they are clearly moving as if the urban space is their territory. They're not moving around as if they fear or even acknowledge humans. The city is theirs, and it is all informal, all surrounds. Informality is also a site of politics. At the Dubai-Sharjah border, for example, the fence between Dubai's Al Nada neighborhood and Sharjah's Al Nada neighborhood has become a site of commute. First, it was just a rip in a metal fence that people used to cross so they would not have to pay hefty taxi fees going between Emirates. These two Emirates do not get along, so they make traffic between them difficult. So if you cross the Emirate line, you end up paying a hefty fee in your taxi fare. So now the original rip in the fence, though, is a full-fledged opening complete with a red carpet. This thickening of use has made the surrounds a new form of inhabitation, similarly to how pedestrians and bikers will utilize highways in the Gulf due to lack of proper pedestrian or public transit infrastructure. Informality in relation to non-humans is also a site of political subjectivity. Feeding street animals in Dubai is finable, for example. Yet even the most precarious and underpaid immigrant will feed and care for cats, grow gardens, and leave out birdseed, as I will explore today. I will also discuss how cat care both transgresses and reproduces existing social inequalities. I want to posit that if we take the time to look down, not up, and look at what we think are interstitial spaces, we will find that human-non-human encounters are significant and everywhere. So what happens if we look down and take seriously, as design and architecture, the artifacts of multi-species care around the city? What does it tell us about how people, most of whom are not permanent, inhabit the city and make home? So as I said, since moving to the UAE, I have gone on a series of catwalks in several parts of the country. While each area was so different, they were all archaeological sites exhibiting material cultural remains of multi-species care, or what I am referring to as microarchitectures. I want us to rethink urban planning and design to take these microarchitectures seriously. Often they are dismissed as trash, as unhygienic, as spoiling the aesthetics of the city. However, this is a colonial and anthropocentric way of seeing space. What do these architectures mean to those who construct them and to those they are constructed for? They are modes of inhabitation. They are ways in which we make home, no matter how temporary that home might be. And for many of us, making home includes claiming public space and producing social and kin networks that include the non-human. So let me show you a couple more pictures. Okay, so this is a bird coop in the back of a nursery at the very edge of Sharjah. So I was there buying plants, and my husband was like, "You got to see what's back here. You got to see what's back here." And by the time I got there, most of the pigeons had fled. But this guy is taking care. He's built this himself. He's taking care of pigeons in the back of his nursery. This is a cat care in front of a mosque in Ras Al Khaimah, where every day at dawn and dusk, cats come and gather, and people feed them. And when I was visiting, there was an Emirati man who pulled up in a car and left a bunch of cat food there. So people know that this is a place to come and feed cats. And this is the site of, this is where the turkeys were also. This is the site of the old fruit and vegetable market in Sharjah, which used to be an open air market and now has kind of been gentrified and moved across the street into an air conditioned indoor market. So a lot of the relationships between cats and the vendors have been broken there, and instead now you have caretakers coming from other parts of Sharjah to take care of the cats that are remaining in that location. Okay, so let me get into some detail about these catwalks. I'll start with my favorite. I don't know why this still doesn't work. Okay, thank you. Which is with Mona Lisa, who also goes by Lisa. So Mona Lisa has lived in Dubai for 25 years. She first arrived from the Philippines to take up a job as a housemaid in Abu Dhabi, during which time she studied for and received a graduate degree. Then her luck changed as she started earning more as a personal assistant for a lawyer. But eventually she lost that job due to the lawyer not paying her fees to the Emirati partner in time. And I can talk about some of these logistics in the Q&A if you want. Over the course of her years in Dubai, Lisa has held many jobs, some lucrative, some depressively low paying. She has opened and closed businesses and had to move several times. But for over 10 years now, she has been taking care of colonies of cats in International City, which is the neighborhood she lives in, and in the industrial areas surrounding it. Currently, she runs a small business that makes just enough money for her to pay her employees, pay rent on her small studio apartment where she lives with several cats, and pay for the food to feed over 150 outdoor cats. Thank you. In the morning and in the evening, she loads her wagon full of various types of cat food, supplies, and water, and sets off to replenish the many cat feeding and shelter stations she has devised over the years, mostly from found objects thrown out by hypermarkets near her apartment complex. She starts by attending to the feeding stations in her residential area, which you can see here, and then walks on the road, there is no sidewalk, to the adjoining industrial park where she has several colonies of cats and has set up a small cat city for them, conveniently set against Dubai municipality water containers. Oops, can you go back one? Okay, thanks. Which you can see on the left, the water container there, so that it does not get too hot in the summer. I thought going into this area that I would see suffering cats in derelict conditions, but they were all healthy and happy and awaiting Lisa's arrival, running after her wagon and rubbing up against her legs. I got affection from some, but many looked at me warily. They only trust her. I was the only person she'd ever brought along with her when she does her rounds. She knows each of them and has named them all. She also brings several types of food, as many are picky and they like what they like. This industrial sandy space turned out to be an oasis, not just for the cats, but also for some of its human inhabitants. We could see sofas and chairs set outside of warehouses where factory workers were lounging on their break. They had grown gardens all over the area outside of their workplace, many plants that reminded them of their homes in Pakistan and Bangladesh. So you can see some of them here. I asked them about the plants, and they said that they had grown them all, that Mona Lisa takes care, so basically anything here that's not a palm tree, they've grown. That Mona Lisa takes care of the cats, and they take care of the plants. They also feed the pigeons from time to time. They coexist in this hidden space that from the street looks derelict and empty. As the workday wound to a close, a pickup football match started. We finished up our feeding and braved the traffic on the road back to International City. This catwalk challenged several of my presumptions about the city. First, Lisa is claiming public space as a woman, claiming car space as a pedestrian, and her colonies are not suffering but living happily and healthily in societies. Our idea that all cats need rescue is one that we need to rethink, as removing just one animal from this ecosystem can upset an entire society. We can also think in more nuanced ways about the cats themselves as individuals, not as an undifferentiated mass or species. They all had their own ways of engaging Lisa and their own levels of wariness towards me. This is, of course, an unequal relationship, as cats must attune themselves to our actions, which create the conditions for both their survival and the violences they face, in ways that we do not need to attune ourselves to theirs. Lisa has also, over the years, asserted her right to her feeding stations, pushing the developer to educate the security guards to not remove them, befriending grounds workers who remove the paper plates she leaves behind, and applying pressure on new management to not call pest control if residents complain. Asserting herself and doing so much care work also drains her, both financially and emotionally. One day, a few months after our cat walk, Lisa arrived in the industrial area to feed her colony and found several of her cats hiding up in the trees, and others nowhere in sight. Then she made a tragic discovery. One of her cats had been killed by a dog that someone had abandoned in the area. She posted a TikTok video about this incident, sobbing, which led me to reach out to her. In response, Lisa forwarded me a couple voice memos on WhatsApp of a conversation she had had with some of the workers there. They had seen the dog. In Urdu and their broken English, I could hear the men discussing what happened with each other and then communicating it to Lisa. Two of the workers, brothers, decided to sleep there that night to protect Lisa's cats in case the dog came back. We see here layered ecologies of care and socialities between people who otherwise might never meet or interact. Several scholars have documented now how plants are central to migrant and refugee homemaking practices as well. Here we can see how plants and cats produce homes places for people from multiple ethnic backgrounds, sometimes evocative of back home, but also distinctly new. This is where I find the language of reparative ecology useful. By reparative ecology, I do not mean restoration to some imagined prior nature, nor do I mean sustainability in the technocratic sense in which Gulf cities often use the term as greening, beautification, carbon accounting, or large-scale environmental planning. I'm interested instead in the small, improvised, and non-innocent practices through which damaged urban worlds are made more livable. Mona Lisa's feeding stations, the workers' gardens, the pigeons they sometimes feed, the sofas outside the warehouses, the brothers sleeping in the industrial area to protect the cats. These are not formal environmental projects, and they are rarely recognized as design, infrastructure, or policy. Some may even be treated as violations, as trash, disorder, unhygienic behavior, unauthorized feeding, improper use of space. But they are ecological practices nevertheless. They produce shade, food, routine, attachment, protection, and cross-species forms of obligation and care. Reparative ecology, then, helps us think care without innocence. These practices do not undo the violence of abandonment, migrant precarity, heat, industrial land use, or uneven urban development. They are fragile and often exhausting. They depend disproportionately on people who are themselves precarious. But they also show us that repair is already happening in the interstices of the city through small forces and microarchitectures that make life possible where former planning either does not see life or seeks to remove it. Oh, here's another garden that they had grown. Okay. So while it might seem easier in suburban and industrial areas to set up cat feeding stations, as they are not designed for tourists or wealthier residents, we can still see informalities in some of the most formalized parts of the city. So let's go back to DIFC. This is the area with the big mega skyscrapers that I showed you earlier. It's an area designed to be manicured, draw tourists, and house uber wealthy residents. Even in one of the most formalized parts of the city, though, we see informality and find non-humans as well as traces of care for them. The image here is a set of food and water bowls left under a peepal tree, which also has traces of Hindu worship, like a gold sash tied to the tree and coconut left underneath it. Apparently, leaving food and water for cats is tied to these ideas of spiritual obligation and reverence. We can also find in this area small patches of undeveloped land and observe humans interacting with non-humans as part of their daily life, like this mother teaching her daughter how to feed a cat. While most non-humans are not sanctioned or given space in Dubai, peacocks are an exception and can be seen roaming all over this area, escapees from the nearby palace grounds. But even with the control humans exert over which animals are brought in, which are elevated, which are undesired, which are removed, they also too have their own forms of agency and temporality. My cousin's husband walks to work near Emirates Towers every day, and part of his routine includes admiring the many peacocks he sees along the way. The day my friend Shama and I went for our catwalk, however, the peacocks had all retreated into the trees. We were even too late by then to see more than a single odd cat, as after the early evening, cats tend to find secluded spots to sleep. Imagine our surprise then when we saw some movement in the bushes and realized that there were bunnies on the grounds too. You can go forward one. Thank you. Apparently, these critters come out later in the evening after the threat of larger animals has subsided. We ran into a couple who come specifically at that time with vegetables to feed the bunnies. Not only do we find layered ecologies of multi-species care in this part of the city, but also multiple temporalities, with non-humans, despite their unequal power dynamics with humans, dictating the rhythm of our days based on their movements and desires to engage with the city and with us. The third and final catwalk I want to showcase is on the urban edges, at an abandoned but now slowly revitalizing warehouse area in Abu Dhabi called Mina Zayed. Unused for about 20 years, Mina Zayed can be considered a rewilded space of sorts. Plants and trees are thriving and growing into streets and buildings. The area has feral foxes, some of whom made an appearance, albeit from afar during our walk. And it is also full of hundreds of cats, many part of multi-generational families at this point, while newer additions are regularly abandoned there by former owners or breeders, as the animal market is nearby. Whereas the cats I encountered on my walk in International City were wary of humans and of human architectures, especially cars and streets, cats understand the street differently in Mina Zayed, where both humans and their cars rarely show up. In fact, they associate cars with food, so will crowd around them and even climb inside. There are several feeders who come to Mina Zayed regularly to care for the cats. On our trip, we ran into a Filipina housewife who feeds over 300 cats, which usually takes her about 9 hours a day. She was accompanied by an Emirati woman, clearly less seasoned at cat care, who was shadowing her to learn best practices. In this abandoned area of the city, we made an unlikely group, 4 women of different age, race, and national backgrounds, connecting over a mutual desire to care for cats. While urban edges can be sites of marginalization, as they certainly are in many industrial areas, labor camps, and abandoned buildings, they are also spaces where new forms of inhabitation, social relations, and life can emerge. My catwalk showed that cats mediate community and social norms. This also came up in many of my interviews, that cat care transgresses some of the rigid class, race, gender, and nationality social boundaries in the UAE. I learned about WhatsApp groups populated by a range of community members, from wealthy villa owners to housemaids to security guards to gardeners, who forged friendships through cat care networks. I also heard about how many residents donate money to help struggling rescuers with their vet bills, or to help those who have lost their jobs to relocate home with their pets. I know people who regularly bring food to labor camps to help residents there feed strays, as people often abandon animals in those areas, adding to the care labor of the most vulnerable human populations. And residents have come together from a range of backgrounds to lobby large developers to set up formalized feeding stations in their communities and ban the municipality from coming in to remove animals. Yet these relationships also reproduce certain race and class hierarchies in the Gulf. The Emirati man I mentioned at the mosque in Ras Al Khaimah, for example, does not feed the animals himself, but drops off food expecting that care work to be done by the mosque workers. I've heard of wealthy residents in posh Dubai neighborhoods like Jumeirah driving around with bags of cat food only to have their uniformed maids distribute it. And it is common practice to abandon animals at fish markets and in industrial areas, expecting laborers to care for them. Even on Facebook groups, which I have also been researching, racialized presumptions about who can take care of animals abound, with little consideration for the precarities of life in the UAE for low-wage Asian and African residents, precarities which have only sharpened since the beginning of the recent US-Israeli war on Iran. Animals are even sent to Europe at a cost of thousands of dirhams, with the presumption, a colonial presumption, that animals receive better care here. That said, let me tell you about the impact that cats have had on my interlocutors and some of their takeaways from our catwalks. For all of them, cats were a salve in their lives and grounded their experience of community, often in the wake of having trouble making human social connections. For Elena, who lives in Business Bay, her transition to Dubai from Russia to start a business with a friend left her lonely and disappointed when she saw her friend get caught up in the bling of Dubai life. So she took to taking walks around her neighborhood and hanging out with cats. For some, their sense of community intensified through our cat walks. One of the students who took me around the American University of Sharjah campus and had grown up there as a faculty child said, I felt a greater sense of community that I haven't felt in many years after going on our walk together. Mona Lisa was happy to hear that I found her cats to be healthy and happy. It validated her work, but also made her wonder what would happen to her cats if she could not continue for some reason, which was a fear many of my interviewees related. And Shama, who I walked around DIFC and Emirates Towers with, also discussed both the political aspects of walking and what it meant to look down to see from the non-human point of view. She said, taking a walk in the first place feels like a deliberate, conscious act of exerting some kind of civic right to the neighborhood, to perform belonging, especially in showing Neha around the neighborhood, as though I share an intimate, secret relationship with the space, which only I can talk about. With the non-human as the starting point, it felt as though we suddenly shifted vantage points. Instead of looking upward at the glass and steel towering over, we looked to the ground, to the little nooks of parking lots and under vehicles where four-legged furry city dwellers make themselves comfortable. In a context where it's hard to be truly present, this was a refreshing way to bring our attention back to the nuances of our everyday environments, which we often quite mindlessly drift through. During this walk in particular, it's almost as if the non-human somehow became a window to understand human vulnerability in what is often described as an impersonal, hyper-neoliberal, inorganic, fast-paced neighborhood, if not city. Many of my interlocutors linked their own immigration status, temporariness, and lack of a fixed future to the cats they engaged in their everyday lives. Nevertheless, cats were for them a way of making home and a way to inhabit the city with more ease. I have also realized that these walks and talks and feeding cats have been about me making home and community myself in the UAE in ways that blur and challenge my scholarly and personal ideas about what personhood, kinship, politics, and home means. I think this is best summed up in a recent piece, I Will Be Your Home, written by Sanabur Sabah, who I also interviewed, about a stray cat named Jeannie, who she cares for outside of her apartment building and to whom she promised, I will be your home. She says in the piece she wrote, as a lifelong Indian expat, I've never had a permanent home. 3 generations of my family have lived in the Gulf. As a woman in her 40s who never felt fully at home in her body or her surroundings, promising to be Jeannie's home helped me find a home within myself. The homeless cat made me realize home isn't 4 walls or a passport, it's what makes me me. And as cliched and new age as it might sound, I am enough. So I'm going to move to my conclusion. I found the statement, I will be your home, to be quite profound. It shows us home is relational and meaningful even in its non-fixity. All the human and non-human persons I have introduced you to today are making multi-species homes with others. This is not a situation unique to the Gulf. Last year, I read a book called The Guest Cat by Japanese author Takashi Hirade, who profoundly captures how a couple who had recently moved into a new rental home became attached to their neighbor's cat, who would come into the kitchen every day for food and naps, but never let them touch her. After the cat's sudden passing and the neighbor's refusal to let them visit her grave, the couple's desire to reside in the rental home dissipated. However, they searched tirelessly for a new apartment where they might have a view of the cat's favorite tree, which she was buried under. While people make home with cats everywhere, in the Gulf, we supposedly have the unique situation of temporariness. But is it really that unique? Or do we need to unsettle our idea of non-migrant lives as fixed, stable, already at home? Everyone makes home with others, and often within precarity or without a sense of what the future holds. We tend to think that the Gulf does not allow for home because of its temporary migration regime, where residency is tethered to employment and permanence and citizenship are mostly foreclosed. We think that home is exceptionally fraught and precarious there. This implies that there is a pure space of belonging out there, a home of permanence and belonging. But feminist scholars have long challenged this idea of home. We can see that houselessness and the need to migrate internally are rampant in the sending countries of the Gulf. For Muslims like Sanabar, India will never be home given its increasingly Islamophobic politics. For many of the South Asian women my former student Manal interviewed in her research, going back home to India or Pakistan was full of insecurity about gendered safety. So perhaps we need to abandon this dichotomy that home in the Gulf is fraught while elsewhere it is somehow fixed. Who do we erase in claiming a pure relationship to home anywhere? What can Gulf inhabitation tell us about homemaking in general, rather than considering the Gulf as a unique case? And how can we improve our lives there together by paying better attention to our modes of inhabitation? How might our small acts, our small forces, add up to shifts in norms and lessening of precarity? So one final caveat before I end. While the experiences I have discussed today are important and impactful relationalities to explore in understanding everyday life in the UAE, I do not want to paint a romantic picture. There is a lot of suffering among animals as well as humans, and a lot of animal cruelty. Rescuers are burnt out and stretched to their financial limits, caring for sick and injured animals. Street animals are sources of controversy, and even though UAE federal law promotes trap, neuter, and return for community cats, complaints from residents often lead to developers calling private pest control companies who will then dump or kill animals. Those tasked with managing these complaints are usually security guards, underpaid and precarious in their employment. Many of these guards are themselves in relationships with these cats and in social networks with cat carers in the community. Regardless, they are beholden to follow directives from their management if they cannot find someone to intervene on their behalf. So it is not just the care for animals, but violence against them that is outsourced to the most vulnerable populations in the country, furthering the entanglements between human and animal marginalization and precarity. In conversation with rescuers or institutional actors, we all have a tendency, me included, to say, well, this government has the money and the power, so why can't they just neuter all the cats and set up feeding stations? It won't cost a lot and the problem will be solved, right? I would like to end by asking, why do we so often, in the spirit of urban planners and architects, like to think like a state? What would it mean to think and work with small forces and microarchitectures instead? If formal modes of making our cities haven't brought us the everyday life and community formations we've wanted, then maybe it is time to move away from our esteem for top-down practices and to recognize the more immediate and inherently multi-species relationships we are constantly building around us. It is through these informal modes of inhabitation and homemaking that we can build more equitable and welcoming urban communities with a range of human and non-human co-residents. To think through multi-species ecologies of migrant homemaking, then, is to begin not with permanence, nativeness, ownership, or formal planning, but with relation. Cats in the UAE are not simply strays to be managed, pests to be removed, or pets to be rescued into private homes. They are Indian Ocean and Gulf urban subjects whose lives are entangled with the histories of migration, trade, abandonment, care, and repair that have made these cities. Attending to them allows us to see homemaking not as the achievement of permanence, but as an ongoing practice of making life livable with others, human and non-human alike. Thank you.
Wow. Amazing, right? You made me standing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
You want me to stand? I can stand also.
That's okay, as long as you can find it.
Yeah.
It's okay if I talk online. Everyone online can hear me? I don't know. Look. Online people can hear me? All right, whatever. Okay. That was that was really amazing, really amazing. I've been doing work myself on the history of cows in Canadian cities.
I know.
Which are completely absent. And it was really refreshing to hear someone speak about cats, cultures and cat ecologies without immediately going towards talking about cats as these super villains, right? The go-to discourse at the moment is to talk about cats as one of the biggest problems in cities. We have to monitor them, we have to manage them. And it was really just, for me, amazing to hear the complexity. But that's not my gushing. We've got, I want to say, about 30 minutes to actually have a proper discussion. So we've got a microphone.
I don't think I need to keep this on anymore, do I? What do you guys think?
Should we stop the recording in the meantime?
Yeah. All right. Yeah. All right, so we stopped recording. And by the way, you would have seen with the journalist camera. I'm sorry, I should have told you what that's about beforehand.